welcome to episode 8 of the Talking Horses podcast. By the people, for the people, the weekly podcast that brings you reviews and previews of all the big racing weekends, as well as attempting to look behind the curtain of the sport with a view to increasing understanding, accessibility, and ultimately enjoyment of racing for all. Ben and Bruno, back with you again for what is the final episode before the Cheltenham Festival next week. We are on practically now the eve of the festival, and Bruno, we're recording this fairly early on Friday morning for a change, given your work schedule has changed this week, and you're telling me you're a bit sleep deprived. You're up till midnight placing bets, which is wonderful to hear.
Yeah, well, we had our final preview call rather last night with our inner sanctum of Anteposters, and that was badly timed because we finished at 11. And I was very excited at the end of it. So I couldn't, it's not the sort of thing you can just switch off the old noggin when you're thinking about value and angles. So I had to, strike whilst the iron was hot. So I did, in the form of Manila Kuna in the Albert Bartlett and Journey with Me in the Ballymore.
Lovely stuff.
But I mean, the sleep thing now doesn't really matter. I'm just bouncing because we are 3 days out, aren't we? 4 days out.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's the best time of year. It is. It's Christmas.
It really
better than
is.
Christmas. It's better than birthdays. It's better than, say it quietly, wedding days. It's just what a time to be alive. What a time.
Yeah. Good job the spouses aren't listening to this or never do.
Absolutely. I think this is our safe place, really.
Yeah, totally,
Hopefully in time we'll have thousands and thousands of listeners, but our wives will never be two of them. So
yeah, that's fine.
Long may it continue. Right. So this week we've got very vaguely similar format. We're going to start, as we did last week, with Deep Grounds, with very much the Cheltenham Festival in mind in terms of our subject matter. Then we're going to move on and have a look at what are we going to do next? Are we going to do Cheltenham? We're going to do the Antepost angle.
We are. The Gold Cup. The big one.
Yes, the big one. I'm still not sure I've actually managed to make head or tail of it, but let's see how we go. Then we'll have a look back at actually some brilliant racing last weekend. I'm quite looking forward to reviewing that. And all of a sudden, I now really want to go to Kelso. And then we'll have a look at the week ahead, or the weekend ahead rather, before we finish, as always, with 3 out. So, should we crack on?
Let's crack on.
Right. So, Deep Ground this week. So we were considering doing something that is vaguely Cheltenham Festival oriented, because it would be silly to try and suggest that people's minds are anywhere else at this time of year. And the most widely discussed topic, I suppose, in the last few weeks is the 2 different handicapping systems between the BHA in Britain and the IHRB in Ireland. Now, firstly, sort of how that sort of system has come to the point where they are operating differently, and then how they come together for Cheltenham and how they specifically played out for the festival this year. So I don't know, I might be landing you in this, but Bruno, do you want to just sort of set the scene a little bit for what we're talking about with these 2 different handicapping systems?
Yeah, totally. We touched on it last week in 3 out, but it's worth going over again in more depth because it has been a hot topic in the run-up. So 2 different systems run by 2 different bodies, which largely is fine because there's not a huge amount of crossover in terms of British horses taking on Irish horses, apart from at the big kind of spring festivals, really. And that's Irish horses coming over. And there's many reasons as to why the reverse doesn't happen, which is another discussion for another day, probably. And the issue you have in those circumstances where the Irish horses are coming over is the British handicapper has to make sense of their form in relation to British horses that they haven't run against. Now, also in the backdrop of this is a bit of a mismatch in, let's say, results rather than quality for the time being from previous festivals. So everybody's heard about Ireland 23, Britain 5 from last year, and a lot of soul searching that's gone on since then within British racing. And the handicap system being a way, perhaps, of just smoothing that out a little bit this year. So that feels quite publicly like a strategy from the handicapper in Britain to level the playing field somewhat.
Yeah, very much.
So that's the kind of backdrop. But I guess that the the obvious solution, if you will, that's come out from various sections of the sport, including trainers like Gordon Elliott, is to unify the system and have one, I guess, global handicap system, which is not just Britain and Ireland, but also you've got, you know, a lot of racing, national hunt racing in France as well as other countries. So that's the proposed solution. But is it that important? I put to you.
Yeah, well, that I suppose is the angle that we've ended up coming at this from, because it was getting an awful lot of airtime and the various media outlets, and so thought, well, let's have a little look into some of the claims that are being made, and firstly, just to sort of try and get our heads around it, really, rather than approaching it with any particular view. It was more than anything, it was just interesting. And so there's a few horses that have been mentioned in the last sort of couple of weeks since the handicap weights have come out. So I had a little look at those in a bit more detail, and the first two that sprang to mind were Langer Dan, who is now favourite for the 2.5 mile handicap hurdle on Friday, the Martin Pipe, in which he finished second to Galopin des Champs last year. So, and he's a Dan Skelton horse, so very much a good one to look at when it comes to handicaps, given Skelton's record with these Cheltenham handicap hurdles. And then comparing him with Drop the Anchor, who is a JP McManus owned, Pat Fahey trained Irish handicap hurdler. So if we look at Langer Dan first, so he ran at Taunton, I think it was 2 weeks ago. That was his first run of the season. Very clearly has had the Martin Pipe as his main target all year. Dan Skelton has said as much on multiple occasions, and so this was obviously a prep run for that. He was carrying top weight. He was ridden out the back in a sort of relatively small field handicap. He was priced accordingly. He finished a 10 length 6th, but never tailed off, jumped fine, travelled well, didn't really get, asked to go and try and close on the leaders, probably was carrying a bit of extra sort of winter weight. And he was dropped £3 for what was a 10 length 6th in the end. And that ties in with what you were saying about that British handicapper's sort of concerted effort to try and maybe redress the balance of inflated handicap marks that have been given to British horses in recent years. Then you look at, so that's a £3 drop for that performance. Then you look at Drop the Anchor. Now he was left on the same mark relative to his Irish mark for the Coral Cup, which is his target next week. And on the face of it, for a similar margin of defeat in his last run in Ireland, which was certainly a better race than the one that Langer Dan went in. However, the difference with Drop the Anchor is, so when you look at that, if you look at an Irish horse being left on the same mark, that's generally representative of leniency, because Irish horses are not getting dropped when they come over here, really. It's a question of how much they go up for the most part. So for Drop the Anchor to stay on the same mark is actually representative of leniency from the British handicapper.
Yeah, I think the average for this year's festival was a £5 rise, wasn't it, or just under? We talked about last week. So yeah.
So that perfect. So that gives you an idea of sort of relative to that how Drop the Anchor has been treated. What that chatter about, so Drop the Anchor was being used as an example of, well, is this fair? Are the Irish being treated in the same way as the Brits? And that race in Ireland, that race in Ireland last time, he was a very eye-catching 5th, I think, coming from well out of it on the turn in at Leopardstown at the Dublin Racing Festival, and absolutely rattling home, which has given people confidence that this step up in trip, which apparently has been coming for a while, is going to be the answer for him. But what it doesn't look at is he actually ran a well-beaten 9th at Ascot in a Grade 3 handicap in December off a mark of 146. And he was beaten by miles. He was, distant 9th, as I said, 30-odd lengths. Never really looked like he was going to feature in the finish. He's now £5 lower relative to that mark that he ran off, that mark of 146 that he ran off at Ascot. So actually, when you look at it like that, the drop from the mark he was given by the British handicapper in December is £5, which is actually broadly in line with Langadan. And when you consider that in that time frame, he's actually had a really eye-catching run in Ireland, I think it oversimplifies the point about sort of fairness when you look at it through those two horses. And actually, I think it also sort of presents a potential benefit of not just entering your horses in Britain to get a handicap mark, which we'll come on to, but actually running them in a race, because you can then get a much better sense of where they are, but also the handicapper can get a better sense of where they are. And if you feel that the handicap marks as an Irish trainer or owner that you're getting when you come over to Cheltenham are unfair, run them in a race. And if they don't win, do what you do in Ireland. Because it appears in the case of Drop the Anchor that actually that's given him a more beneficial, it's given him a better chance at Cheltenham than he would otherwise have had, in my view. I don't know whether you've got any alternative view to that.
Yeah, well, I guess the strategy that's been employed by a few Irish trainers has been what you alluded to there, and Gordon Elliott's been chief amongst them in doing so, is to enter races in Britain, and that's purely just to figure out where they are from a mark point of view. But by then withdrawing them from that race and kind of not providing the handicapper with solid evidence as to what their mark should be, whether that's by virtue of a run that you plan to be below par or a prep run, or that's another story. But you're right, they could go further and influence the handicapper more in that sense by actually running them, which is exactly the case with Drop the Anchor. And that's probably a satisfactory result, I imagine, for JP on that particular example. So there is more that trainers can do rather than just bleat about marks they've been given. Yeah. It's a difficult job, this handicapping job, as it is, I'd say, and it rests on just a few poor souls that are kind of scrutinised to high, and everyone's got a point of view in it, and it's a subjective thing as well. So it's not an exact science. And particularly when you're bringing in, horses across two different territories, it's made even harder still. So, yeah, I think the bleating is getting a bit boring for my liking from the trainer and owner side of things. And there are solutions on their side, such as actually running them. So yeah, I think that's a good example of how it could work right now without a unified system.
It draws parallels for me with football. Who would be a handicapper? You replace handicapper with referee. Exactly. And trainers and owners are the players surrounding the referee. Everybody knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
But if anything, that makes it more tiresome because it's all just a bit of an act that might have an impact. It might not have an impact. So I think it's in the interest of trying to create some understanding around something that has the potential to be quite complex. That's basically what's happening here. People are just trying to influence, as you say, those few poor souls that are tasked with trying to make this sport fair. And it's very easy to level accusations of being unfair. It's much easier than it is to give praise for the excellent work that they do. And I think that sort of seems to me to be the underlying point here, is that it is excellent work that they do, and actually we don't really have much of a problem. And also this is something that just raises its head twice a year, particularly for Cheltenham, maybe for Aintree, for the spring festivals, but particularly for Cheltenham. Now, you talked about Gordon Elliott, and we talked about why are we not all operating off the sort of a universal handicap system, and that very much was a point raised by Gordon. Should all these handicappers not be working from a level playing field? Now, there are a few, if any, more successful trainers in Cheltenham handicaps in recent seasons than Gordon Elliott. So one can only assume that either he feels it would be of interest to of the Irish horses' chances at Cheltenham if the handicapping systems were unified, and or that it would make his life a lot easier than it currently is, given his technique of entering horses, as you mentioned, just to get a handicap mark and then pulling them out and not running them, which would also, as Keith Melrose pointed out in the Racing Post the other day, probably come at some sort of cost, or will come at some sort of cost to the horses' owners, to have to pay to enter them just to get a handicap mark. I can't think the handicap the entry fee will be astronomical, but it still exists.
Yeah.
Which made me think the British handicapper would probably just be better off offering his own subscription service to Irish trainers wanting an accurate British rating.
It is said that you can bring them up, but because that's not, it's just a conversation, informal. That's not set in stone. So that is what is said. I do sympathise a little bit with the trainer point of view, in that if you did have a unified system, which to me is actually a bit of a no-brainer. I don't see why you wouldn't. I don't see it as a major issue. I agree with you on that point. So it's not, top of the list for the sport to solve. But if you did have a unified system, trainers can plan better. Perhaps even trainers could, declare their intentions for horses a bit better and a bit further out as well, rather than having this system where we are 4 days from the festival and you've got several horses still entered in several races, and from a punting point of view, and just trying to analyse those races purely in a sporting context, it's quite difficult to do that. We were trying to do it last night with some of the handicaps and just thought, I'll just move on and wait till the decks. Which again is only going to be important for a very niche audience, perhaps, of proper geeks like us who like to get into it. But yeah, I can see the advantages from that point of view, and it certainly takes away an excuse for a trainer to hammer a handicapper with, if there is something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it brought sort of our attention to the fact that there is an Anglo-Irish jumps classification that is published at the end of each season, which obviously comes a bit late to be useful for anything.
Yeah.
But it does exist. And so this was sort of, I think I vaguely knew, because you normally, when you're depressed, in early May, and you're trying to work out what the hell you're going to do with your time after the jump season is finished, although for flat fans, it's the equivalent of October for jumps fans. And you suddenly get something pops up about jumps for the first time in a month, and it's who's the best jumps horse of last season, and you kind of open it up because you're desperate to read anything with Chakenpost, Poursoir, or Manila Indo in it, and you read it and then you forget about it. But I thought, well, let's have a little look into this in a bit more detail. And basically, the British and Irish handicappers come together and create a unified system. It's limited to horses that have performed to a level of 150 plus, so that a handicap rating, a performance rating of 150 plus, which generally is starting to get to the very top end of handicaps, but primarily into graded performances, which is kind of a little bit helpful, because generally where this matters is for actual handicaps itself. But just if you look purely at Shiskin versus an Ergamine, they were both rated the same at the end of last season, I think 169. And then if you look at the proximity with which they finished at Ascot, that suggests that this system isn't too far off. However, the marks under this classification were just the same as their UK and Irish marks, respectively. So you don't have to do too much. It doesn't give you anything about the methodology, from what I could see. But if you look broadly, the majority of horses seem to have been given the same as their British or Irish mark when you go down the list. And unfortunately, there's no way of knowing how accurate this system is where it really matters, as I mentioned, which is for the handicaps, as very few in that list, if any, have actually run against each other this season. And a significant part of that is the cutoff of 150. There have been Irish horses that have come over and run against British horses and handicaps, but they're not at a mark of 150 or above. I saw one race. There was the Relkeel at Cheltenham on New Year's Day. Stormy Island beat McFabulous. She was getting £7 when off a £6 lower mark, according to the Anglo-Irish classification. That was kind of good because neither of those horses had run, I think, at all this season until that race. So it allowed, certainly in Britain anyway, so it allowed the mark that was given to them in May last year to sort of still be applicable.
Right. But that's one kind of use case for this system, isn't it?
It basically just proved that in that example, a two-length win when getting £7 off a £6 lower mark, the result made sense. But it's really hard to find sort of many examples of how that would work. But it is interesting that something exists. So my thinking was that the reason that they don't roll that out is that it could just be too time consuming for what is essentially just meant to be a bit of fun at the end of the season. But would it not otherwise be reasonable to apply this handicapping approach to all horses and training on both sides of the Irish Sea?
Yeah, I think so. I think what it raises, I guess, more widely, and why the topic's interesting for me anyway, is not the specifics of this horse has been dropped £3. Why has that happened? I think it should be this. It's actually more the fact that it seems to be a bit of a symptom of that current imbalance in quality, perhaps, between Britain and Ireland. You wouldn't, if it was more of a level playing field in terms of the quality, then you wouldn't really have these discussions at all. So I think, again, while it would be useful to have this kind of global system or unified system, the more pressing matter that's related to this is for UK racing to address a drop in quality, which I think is a consensus now, isn't it? Based on what happened at the festival last year, and things like the amount of prize money, the cost of the horses that are bought and where they're going training. They're more going to the Mullins Elliott yards, aren't they, than they are to the Skelton, the Nichols, and the Hendersons these days. So that will be a topic we'll definitely get into at some point in terms of the health check of UK racing, and I think that's why this is interesting for me, because it's kind of a lot of noise around a symptom of a bigger issue. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, Paul Nichols was saying the other day in something I happened to watch, yet another Cheltenham preview, that at these sales, it's they just don't have the owners to go to these sales and to purchase the sort of horses for the sort of prices that Mullins and Elliott can and de Bromhead can swoop in and pick them up for. So yeah, absolutely. It's definitely representative of trying, and as a handicapping system on its own, it can't redress the balance. But as you say, it's probably why it's getting a whole lot more scrutiny. I mean, to my mind, and I think this is an important point when you look more broadly at what we're about on Talking Horses podcast. It's trying to sort of demystify some stuff. What racing does brilliantly, as well, if not better than any sport, is navel gazing. What I mean by navel gazing, if that means nothing to you, is just focusing on minutiae within its own world without really thinking about how much difference it actually makes to the overall sport. And I think what is apparent here is the current handicapping system is not necessarily causing too many problems. It just causes a little period of consternation around one or two periods in a season. And actually, it's an example of getting unnecessarily distracted by something that's actually of far less existential importance than, say, things we've talked about before: safety of race courses for the horses, the wider appeal of the sport, particularly to the younger audience that is going to replace the older audience as time goes by, things like that. So, but it's interesting, and no doubt it will be generating a whole load more chat in the 7 days to come, if not longer, depending on how we get on next week. How do you think it will play out next week in terms of the redressing of the 23-5 balance?
I can't see this being the fix. And to your point, I think you concluded this last week when we handled this in 3 out. What you might find is that actually these lenient marks that the British horses are getting is actually going to see them drop out of races in certain angles, because they just won't qualify, because there's enough Irish, there's a big enough Irish contingent to fill the requisite spots you need, and they're obviously rated more highly. So I don't see a huge sea change in that scoreline. I know others do, and I think others think the pendulum is swinging back. I don't see it.
I think it's fighting talk, isn't it? People love a little bit of that, isn't it? It's funny, isn't it, how you get that, and you get that with people with bets you placed as well, as if fighting talk is going to give the horse any better chance.
No chance, yeah. But even actually, like Ruby Walsh being quite maybe he's what's the word, sort of just playing Irish chances down a little bit, but he thinks this pendulum is swinging back a little bit, but I don't know, can't see it myself.
Yeah, I'm sure it will in time, but I don't think it'll be this year. And yet I have backed some British horses, so let's see how they do.
Oh, yeah.
So let's leave that one alone now. We've spent 20 minutes on that topic, but it's hopefully you agree it's a fascinating one, at least to try and understand a little bit better. So hopefully we've done it justice there. So on to this week's Antepost, and as you mentioned at the top, Bruins, we're going to look at the big race festival, the biggest race of the jumps racing season by most people's account, and one that I have really struggled to try and make head or tail of, and that's the Gold Cup.
It's a strange one, isn't it? Because 12 months out, when you see the kind of novice chases that are coming through, you get excited about the Gold Cup earlier, and it seems that the excitement for me seems to sort of dwindle over that period, bit by bit. But I think what we're left with is a really competitive race with a lot of question marks around a lot of the horses. So I've, when looking at this, I've just tried to kind of see who's got the least number of question marks against their name based on various factors. But yeah, it's a huge race. It is the showpiece. It's the biggest prize money on offer for the whole week, obviously. And there's two that I think are pretty solid. So I've gone for one at a price and one rock solid one. And the rock solid one for me, and it has been for a long way out, is Galvin. 3 reasons really. Fantastic Cheltenham record, obviously winner of the National Hunt Chase last year, second to Imperial Aura, wasn't it? In the what was that? The Ultima.
It was what was then the Brown Advisory. It was the 2.5 mile novice handicap chase.
Yeah. So great record at Cheltenham. We know that he's going to get the trip round, given that he's run further at Cheltenham as well. The ground is supposedly going to be drying up, certainly by that Friday, if there's no rain or not much rain. That's going to be in his favour as well. So I think it's around 7-2, 4-1 maybe. I think he's rock solid, and he's obviously beaten the current market leader in Appelutard over in Ireland this year as well. So I'm on him already, and I like that I got there early, and I think he will shorten up come the day, particularly with
I think so.
Particularly with the ground factor, which I think is going to become a big thing as the week goes on.
Tell us about that. We were discussing that on the call last night.
We were, yeah. I guess. Well, we talked last week about what horses might benefit from potential soft ground, but it looks to be going the other way now. So we know that Tuesday the grounds people will make sure it's going to be a good to soft going. But beyond that, they can't affect things. So it's left to the elements, and there are horses that that's going to benefit, and Galvin is definitely one of them. So yeah, and for the same reason, the one that's drawn my eye further down the betting is Tornado Flyer. He doesn't seem to be getting an awful lot of chatter around him at all, despite the fact that he's a King George winner. He's also got a pretty decent Cheltenham record, or a festival record anyway, that I would suggest is quite a positive. 3rd in the Champion Bumper, 5th in a really, really good Marsh Novices Chase, as it was known then in 2020, and 3rd in last year's Ryanair behind Allaho and Fakir Dugarry. And it seems like Willie Mullins has taken a different approach this year with him as well, in terms of how he's racing him. So in previous seasons, he raced him a lot prior to the spring festivals, and this year he's only been out twice. So he's going to be fresh. And obviously the last time we saw him was when he picked up the pieces and won a King George really, really well at Kempton. I guess the trip would be a slight concern, but that's where the ground helps. The drying ground's going to help him get that extra couple of furlongs that he'll need round here. Going to be plenty of competition for the lead early on, which is going to play into the kind of tactics they'll use on him as well. So if they go for that hold-up ride, that could be very, very effective again. And around 12, 14-1, I think that's still pretty good value, I'd say.
Yeah, that's interesting. So to tell us a bit more about the potential pace, because I think Tornado Flyer would definitely need a strong pace to be able to sort of come and pick up the pieces. He actually seems to be a pretty good stayer. And maybe he would be done for, if it turned into a bit more of a sprint, he'd be done for pace by one or two maybe classier horses. So what are you thinking about the pace angle?
I'm certainly thinking, if I go back to last year's Gold Cup and probably that King George as well, thinking about Manila Indo is going to be prominent, Appelutard will be tracking, Galvin will be prominent as well, and that's a change of tactics probably from previous seasons. given his Savills Chase run. He was pretty prominent against Ken Boy, wasn't he? I'm not sure what Protectorate would do, actually. I've not really studied that one enough. How would that play out to your knowledge?
I think he's a horse that generally would be given. I mean, there's how he's been ridden before, and there's how he will be ridden here. I think they feel as though his stamina is to his benefit. So I wouldn't expect to see him ridden out the back to get the trip. And for those that don't know what the hell that means, if you're not sure about whether a horse is going to get the trip, you ride it right out the back, you let it trail all the other horses, and you let it slowly come into the race, rather than try and have it ridden up the front to kind of make the running, because it is harder on a horse to do that than it is for them to, ride in the slipstream of other horses. So I think they'd have some confidence that he'd have the stamina. It'd be generally sort of ridden perhaps in midfield, something like that.
Right. Yeah. What's apparent is that there's probably not a tearaway here in the shape of a Ken Boy, for example. There will be prominence and probably battling for positioning, but not somebody who will want to, pour it on early doors, I don't think. Or a Frodon, for example, would have helped do that. Maybe Santini would be another one that's prominent, but again, would not be front running, I don't think. So, again, just scrolling down the betting here live really to see how that might play out. Plenty of sort of prominent and strategic positioning probably going on early on. So we'll see if that turns into a bit of a bun fight for positioning. That might well again play into Tornado Flyer's hands to come in and pick up some pieces. And we'll come back to new course versus old course, but this is on a stamina sapping new course, which requires proper stayers. So anybody who falls into the trap of trying to pinch a few yards or front run might well get found out in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always a race where you can tell pretty early on if you've got a horse that's got a chance. That you need to be able to travel and jump, and if you don't in a Gold Cup, then you can forget it pretty early on.
You can't shake that champ run from last year.
Oh man, well there's all sorts when you think about it. That is the most prominent one for sure. I mean that was fence one. You were like, okay, well, rip it up and move on.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the Hunter's Chase, please. But I was thinking of even horses like Bell's Hill, like Ruby Walsh talks about that as that he just chose wrong on the year Albion Photo won his first, and Bell's Hill was never travelling.
Yeah, I think I was definitely on. But the Gold Cup tradition dictates that I select at least five horses to back, and I think that Bell's Hill year, because we'd just seen him win at the Irish Gold Cup, hadn't we?
Yeah, we had.
It was probably a really poor renewal of that, to be fair. But Ken Boy was also prominent in the betting, I think, and he fell at the first or second, or unseated at the first or second. So What about yourself? Where do you stand on it, having heard all that spiel?
Yeah, having heard all that rubbish. No, I mean, look, I would, if I was like you and on Galvin at a good price, I'd be very happy. I backed him for the Grand National at the start of this season, and I don't think Gordon expected that he would get to this level. But yeah, good ground, very much in his favour. It was nice ground by the end of the first day when he won the National Hunt Chase last year. Stamina assured, likes the course. Yeah, there's loads to like. I don't think Apritard will win. I think he's had enough chances, and I think last year he should have beaten Manila-Indo. I just, I mean, and at 7-2, 3-1, I'm not prepared to he's clearly a class horse. There's just enough of a doubt that at that price, you'd look immediately elsewhere. Manila-Indo could win, and I mean, it's one of those. It just doesn't particularly excite me. I can't go into a bet on Manila-Indo with any confidence.
Yeah, it requires a lot of faith, I think, given the season he's had. But you know what he's like at Cheltenham. But that to me is never something I want to hang my hat on.
It's one of these races I look at it and I think if anybody's going to give me a really bullish case for any of those at the top of the market, they're just talking out of their bottom, because it's really apart from Galvin,
yeah.
Genuinely apart from Galvin, So I can totally see him at the top. I think for me, I was looking at it and trying to work out, generally in the past, if you think of the sort of Coney Greaves and the Sizing Johns and the album photos when he won his first, even Manila Indo last year, you're looking for horses that are coming into the Gold Cup on the up, both in terms of that season, but also in their careers. I'm much more excited to see if there's something in there that sort of fits that mold. And I mean, the few that do, Protectorat absolutely does. And I'm convinced that Dan Skelton will at some point break through this ceiling of being the Cheltenham Festival handicap hurdle target trainer, at which he obviously excels, and start winning big graded races. And the quality of horses in his yard, the likes of Chamblou, the likes of Protectorat, even horses like LA Bell, you can see them sort of coming through, in a big way now. And I think it won't be long before he starts to make his mark in the grade ones. Do I think that Protectorat will win this year? I think he's got a really good chance. I mean, go back to Aintree last year when he won that grade one. I mean, last year his jumping at the beginning of the season was exceptional, including at Cheltenham, and everyone was getting super excited about him. And then he just fell apart midway through the season. I think there was talk about the fact that maybe he didn't like going right-handed. His jumping and travelling that had looked so assured just suddenly went kind of up in smoke. But then it came back at Aintree in a big way. And then obviously he won again in the Many Clouds this year on softer ground. He looks a horse that is moving in the right direction. They've said that soft ground would be to his benefit, but better ground wouldn't be detrimental to him. So at 8-1, he's not the price, not the bet that he was when Tom Siegel put him up at 16s. I think I kind of wish I'd got on that now. I sort of talked myself out of it at the time, but then you look down album photo. I can't see it now. I really can't see it now. Tornado Flyer would sort of, even though he's 9, he would fit the mold of a horse that's going in the right direction for the reasons that you outlined. Chancery House takes a serious leap of faith, so not for me.
Yeah.
Royal Pagaille won't get his ground. You move down, and then you're into the bigger price horses. For those of you that haven't listened to all of the episodes of the pod so far, I was banging the Ahoy Senior drum for this precise reason, that it was going to be a race that something really good novice would have a good chance in. They are going to Cheltenham, which wasn't guaranteed at one stage, but it's going to be for the novice, the 3-mile novice chase to take on Brave Man's Game, which is going to be a harder assignment in my book. So very disappointed. And the other one that I liked at a big price that I think would have a great chance, given you mentioned the sort of emphasis on stamina on the new course, is Fiddler on the Roof. He is another 8-year-old, very much moving in the right direction. He came second at Ascot in a handicap last time, but he did so off top weight, and he moved there like a classy horse that was the best in the field. And he just got outstayed carrying a big weight on soft ground. His form figures are 2-3, 1-2, 2. And that 1-2-2 was beating Ahoy Senior at the start of the season, and then there's the middle 2 was second in a Ladbrokes Trophy. So I think his stamina is assured. They're going to go for the national with him. I just would love to see them go for this first. They've said that they were going to wait to see if he did a sparkling piece of work this last week, and if he did, then they would give him a chance in the Gold Cup. I haven't read anything about it, so it's those two, Protectorat and Fiddler on the Roof, that interest me.
Yeah, it's that profile, isn't it? On that note, what price do you think Monkfish would have been?
Oh yeah. Well, it depends on how he would have gone this season, because if you'd asked that question about Manila Indo at the start of last season, you might have said, he'd go off favourite, and he went off 11-1.
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? 12 months out, you think, oh right, next year's Gold Cup's going to be an absolute peach because all of these great novices are coming through, and then they stutter and stumble when they go into open company, and even Monkfish was not that impressive at Cheltenham, and then was then beaten by Cole Reevy at Punchestown.
Yeah,
and then he was out for a bit, but yeah, he in terms of profile and age, he would have been absolutely ideal this year. So that's such a shame, but we'll see him next year, won't we?
We will. Yeah, we definitely will. So yeah, I mean, it's. I think there's a lot you can rule out. And it'll be interesting to see on the day. I could see, even Mount Ida I thought had a chance, but she's almost certainly going to go for the mare's chase. So, you're looking for ones at bigger prices, and I think if Fiddler on the Roof doesn't go, conflated isn't. I think you're probably going to struggle to find much outside of the upper echelons of the betting. So at the prices at the moment, I think I'd have to be looking at Protectorat and hope that you steal a march on the market, and you get in at the very beginning of Dan Skelton's rise to Grade 1 prominence.
Nice. Yeah, it's open, that's for sure.
It definitely is. Right, that's the Antepost angle on the 2022 Gold Cup. I think the long and short of that is just back Galvin.
One from the top, Carol, and then one from somewhere down the bottom, I think. That's nice. That'll be my view on that.
Nice. Great stuff. So let's move on then and look at what happened last weekend. There was some really, as we mentioned earlier, some really nice racing, particularly up at Kelso. What a beautiful racecourse that looks like.
Yeah, stunning. It's like the one day of the year that they have blue skies and sunshine, I imagine. Yeah, exactly. There would have been nowhere else I'd rather be that day. It was gorgeous.
It really was. Up in the Scottish borders. So I guess we'll start off with our selections. So
Are we? Really?
Well, let's get it out of the way, shall we?
Yeah.
Autumn Evening. Talk us through the performance of Jesse Harrington, of course, in the Moor Battle.
Yeah, strange one. Travel well enough. I mean, going back to the sunshine, unfortunately, that meant that half the hurdles were taken out, so it made it an altogether different race, which maybe, I don't know, to be honest, if that was detrimental to Autumn Evening's chances or not. But travelled well enough, was sort of tracking the leaders, and then just fizzled out, turning in what was a really, really good race, actually. The finish was great, and Cormier had my eye on beforehand as well, but a well won race by that horse. So there you go. You win some, you lose some, don't you? Well, you win one and you lose the rest, in the case of my tipping so far.
Yeah, it was interesting actually. Last weekend there was a Kelso. North Yorkshire was the southernmost yard to actually have a winner at the track. So it was every race was won by trainers from North Yorkshire or further north than that. So it just shows you that all these sort of supposed powerhouse yards in the south, and they come up and they're all at the top of the market. It was just brilliant to see, and ITV do a wonderful job at this, interviewing the connections. And I mean, I backed in the Moor Battle. I backed Voix de Rev, who's now owned by Lee Westwood these days. And he's trained with a Scottish trainer called Ian Jardine that I'd never really heard of. But it's just great. You get they're interviewed and they're excited. It's a big chance for them, and they really the Northern horses put their best foot forward. Trainers like Nicky Richards, who you never really hear about when it comes to Cheltenham, but he has some seriously good horses, and he had 3 winners at Kelso. So yeah, I thought that was a really nice theme, and one of the reasons why last Saturday's racing was so enjoyable. So yeah, and I mean, on to Amula Gold, which was my selection. I mean, definitely COVID brain. It's one that jumps off the page. It's a bit of a horse I like, and I was like, no, yeah. I'm gonna back it.
You can sort yourself in easy, yeah.
And he was terrible. He jumped off okay, but he jumped poorly down the back on the second circuit, and his chance was gone pretty quickly. I mean, he's broadly consistent though. He's still only 9, so he'll no doubt have other days, perhaps back at Ascot, for which
back at home, back in his home patch, he'll be fine.
That's his place, isn't it? But normally such a consistent horse, which is kind of why I put him up, and it was just disappointing to. I
wonder if there is something in that just the travelling element, and maybe that played into the Autumn Evening performance as well. It'd be great to get some insight on that front, how much that actually takes out of the horse. You hear about things like horses losing a lot of weight through travelling.
Yeah.
Whether that's due to the stress of it or what, I don't know. That'd be a really interesting thing, and that would actually be quite informative with plenty of horses coming over next week, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's Autumn Evening's first trip as well. So
right.
I can't think that he's travelled over for anything else. He's only a 5-year-old, isn't he? So
but even the ones travelling up from the big southern yards clearly didn't get on well last weekend. So it'd be interesting to get some insight on that. So let us know, guys, if there's anything you know on that front.
Very good point indeed. So yeah, the Moor Battle hurdle, just to go back to that in general. Yeah, I mean, I thought Faith War ran well again. And he's had a really good season without winning too many races. and that provides a nice little boost for the elite hurdle form with Adagio's tilt at the champion hurdle in mind. So just
further crowbar that in, yeah.
I don't think a crowbar was needed. I think it just slotted in there. It just paved the way, and it just all came together. But Adagio was 13 lengths ahead of Favour at Wincanton, and the more battles a good race. So yeah, just and then Cormier has a shot now at 100,000 bonus if he wins at Cheltenham, which of course the Shunter did that last year. So could we have 2 years in a row, maybe?
Yeah, and that requires him just to win any race at the festival. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah, I don't think there's anything. Yeah. But the obvious ones, given this is a 2-mile handicap hurdle, would be the county or potentially the Coral Cup. But I think the county
and the Gold Cup, of course, given how open it is. Just go for it, guys. Sod it. Sorry.
Well, why not? I mean, look, stranger things haven't happened. So, and just thinking, I don't want to impinge too much on what we're going to cover in 3 out, but Nell's son won the Premier Novices Hurdle, which is a grade 2, and that added some sheen to John Bond's Haydock victory, because Nell's son was, I think, back in 5th that day. So that was an interesting bit of form. And then one thing I did want to focus on from with a bit more detail from last weekend was the Grimthorpe chase over at Doncaster. Which Mark on the Facebook think, bloody, I don't want to talk about the Grimthorpe chase for 5 minutes, are you? But I'll tell you why. It's to focus on how good a ride Sam Twiston-Davies gave under supervision. And I'm trying really hard to see the positives in this, because I've backed under supervision 3 times this season after he nearly beat Does He Know at Cheltenham. And he's been terrible. And then steps up a little bit further in trip and goes and takes out a staying chase like this in pretty good style. So I was trying so hard to see something positive about it. So maybe this is where I'm using the crowbar. But I actually thought it was a nice opportunity to shed some light on something that doesn't get talked about in enough detail within racing, I don't think. And that is when people say what a good ride from a jockey, what that actually means. So I think if you look at Doncaster, it's a long home straight, and you're turning in. You've still got, I think, must be at least 4 fences. You've still got to jump. Right. So you're not turning in and going for home like you do at Cheltenham or even at Ascot or tracks that have a shorter home straight. And from 3 out, one might have wondered why Sam Twiston-Davies, who is one of the top chase jockeys in the country, you see him do this a lot, why Sam wasn't asking for more from his horse. But he held him together, and helping his jumping takes on even more significance over fences as horses get tired. So the fact that Sam just nursed him up the home straight, he wasn't asking him to go and catch the leader, even though there was still 3, 4, 5 lengths gap between the 2 horses. Just focusing on keeping him in a rhythm, making sure that he didn't lose any ground at his fences as his horse started to get tired, and indeed as the horse out in front started to get tired. And then he produced him at the last to jump into the lead, and then held on to the line. There was a bit of interference, so it nearly completely undercut my point when I saw that it had gone to the steward's room. And so a great ride suddenly becomes a terrible one. But I just thought it was a fantastic example, and I wanted to sort of explain it because I'm not sure, as I say, these things often get the credit, but I'm not sure the average punter, and myself very much included in this historically, would have understood like what the jockey did. And I think hopefully that explains without Sam's ice cool ride on that. And his experience, which is significant considering he used to be the Nichols #1, etc. I don't think under supervision would have won that. So I thought that was worth talking about.
Definitely, and you're right. You hear that phrase so often. And what we'll do is let's dig that clip out and we'll flash it up in our Instagram stories so people can actually see what that's about. And there was another one that we looked at from years back at the festival from Paul Carberry, who's an ex-jockey now, but. It was similarly cool, and it's just knowing how much horse you've got under you, I guess, and just being just incredibly patient and incredibly confident, and that can only come with that word experience that you mentioned. So, that was a cool ride.
Really was. So, anything you wanted to mention from Ireland quickly from last weekend?
Yeah, just one form boost for the Tide Turns, who we think is going to run in the Boodles on Tuesday. There was a win for Vera Verto at Navan. Now, the Tide Turns beat Vera Verto at Punchestown back in January on his hurdling debut, and he also beat HMS Seahorse and Brazil, who have since come out and won really, really well since. So that all adds up to make the Tide Turns, who's not a huge price or anything for the Poodles, but I think he's a really, really solid prospect for that race, given that he's since run behind, in open company behind the likes of Tiupu pretty well, I'd say, with some credit. So I think he is a solid one. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually thinking about it, there was Hoton Couleur must be a good horse as well. If he could beat a horse like Gentleman to Me as well as he did at Leopardstown over Christmas, because Gentleman to Me absolutely epitomised the word procession on Saturday afternoon, making a grade 3. The Flying Bolt chase at Navan looked like a beginner's chase. So
it was like those big field Irish beginners chases, but just with 4 of them, and he was at the front of the van, and they were back at the other end of the telly. It was ridiculous. They had to really pan out to get the full field in.
I watched it and thought that actually at one stage I was willing Gentleman to Me to get one fence ahead of his rivals.
Yeah.
And at one stage it looked like it might actually be possible. So a slightly ridiculous race perhaps, but anyway, that's Hoton Couleur runs in the Arkle and would have to have a chance based on how good the horse that he beaten has proven to be. Yeah. We will get mindful of time, but we've a very quick mention to Ian and Anne Hamilton. They've been talked about a lot this year. They have 6 horses in their yard, tiny little yard. Well, I can't actually remember. I don't think I looked this up. Where they're based in Sunderland, is that right? Or somewhere
they're
like
northeast based, yeah.
Yeah, YA. So just 6 horses in the yard. They've had 12 winners from 28 runs this season, 43% strike rate. Tommy's Oscar has provided 4 of those. He's in the champion hurdle. Barrington Bob has won 4. We know less about him. He's been running in lesser races, but prolific nonetheless. And then Nutswell won at the weekend. That was his 2nd winner this season. I mean, he's 11. He's been an amazing horse for them. He's been running in grade 1s at Aintree last season and other sort of old roans and all that sort of stuff. And Pay the Piper, who's a decent sort of younger chaser. He's won twice this season. So there was a lovely interview with ITV at Kelso after Nutswell had won. Just a tiny team, and it's one of the things that I think makes racing such a wonderful sport. It allows people like them to compete with Nicky Henderson and people who can afford to spend 500 grand on a horse. I thought it was a lovely story.
Yeah, excellent. And you're right, that is a rare thing that the sport has in its favour versus other sports, is that opportunity. And we're going to come on to another one in the weekend preview in a moment as well, over in Ireland.
Great. Well, let's move straight into mindful of time. So we're going to have a look at 2 each for the weekend ahead. Bruno, should we start with you?
Yeah, we'll go straight into that, lovely trainer story from a small yard, and the trainer's name, the trainer in question here is Paddy Corkery, who trains. I've got it here. Officially, the horse that's running tomorrow, Master McShay, is the first horse he has trained. He's only got 3 others in training. He's a tractor mechanic by day. He actually counts Davy Russell amongst his customer base for sorting his tractor out. He used to be a dairy farmer, and this is now his hobby, is to train horses. And in Master McShay, he's got already a Grade 1 winning novice chaser. So he reappears in the Webster Cup tomorrow at Navan, which is a Grade 2. And it really is one of the sport's great stories, in line with what you just discussed on the Hamiltons, that somebody like Paddy Corkery could take out, a Jigginstown horse in a Grade 1 over Christmas, and he's run really, really well behind both Bob Olinger and Galopin de Champs at the Dublin Race Festival most recently as well. So lovely story. Stepping into open company for the first time here in this race. He's going to take on the likes of Notebook, Kilios Emery, Sizing Potsy. But I'm going straight into my weekend tip here. I'm going to side with the emotional story. So Master McShay for me, he's my weekend tip in the, what's it called again? The Webster Cup.
The Webster Cup. Are we getting it? I can't see any prices. Have you had a look at any prices?
No, I can't see anything. So it's SP anyway for us, isn't it? That's our game.
It is. Hopefully he goes off at 1 to 2. So, But I mean, and he also provides a nice yardstick for what might happen next week too. Bob Ollinger beat him by 16 lengths at Goring. Galopin des Champs only beat him by 9 lengths at Leopardstown. So it's based on him, you'd have to like Bob for the Turners next week. But anyway, regardless of all of that, what a story it would be. So I like that one. Brilliant. So Master Max Shee in the Webster Cup, 4:00 at Navan on Saturday for you. So I said we had 2 each. I know at the start you said there was just one you wanted to focus on, which is fine. I do have 2. One is where my weekend selection comes from. So I'll do that second. The first is based on a horse that I really liked for its last run, running again. It's the Listed Mares Bumper at Sandown. I'm fascinated to see that this is getting prime time. It's right in the middle of the card at Sandown, which means they're going to have to take the hurdles out. Bumpers are basically flat races for National Hunt horses, and they're always at the end of the card because you can take the hurdles out of the ground. They're always run on the hurdle track for obvious reasons because you can't take the fences out. And then there's no racing afterwards, so you don't have to put them back in again. This one's happening right in the middle, so they obviously want to give it pride of place. Which is great, why not? These races, so often people are heading out the door when they're taking place. Now, what the horse in question is Hidden Beauty for Fergal O'Brien, who was pulled up last time after a mile at Cheltenham when going off second favourite to a Willie Mullins horse that also did nothing, but that race was won by Mullenbeg in the end, who reopposes here and is I think currently about 6-4 favourite. But Hidden Beauty, if you look at the manner of her debut performance, which was a victory, and the commentator turning in at Fosslas, Hidden Beauty was ridden right out the back, as so many of Fergal's are in bumpers. And the commentator said you'd imagine Hidden Beauty would have to be very good to score from there. Mm-hmm. She duly did. Mm-hmm. Pretty much without the use of the whip. In fact, I watched it and I don't think Liam Harrison even had to go to his whip. He just nursed her into it and she just cruised to the front and then won going away. The form has worked out okay since as well. So the manner in which she pulled up last time under Paddy Brennan, I was all over her in that race and I was so disappointing. Something was clearly not right. So I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on her in that race. Mullenbeg does look a good horse, and Milton Harris is having an amazing season. But at 6-4, Hidden Beauty looked like sort of 7-2, 4-1 when I looked last night. And I read something this week about Fergal that generally in Ireland, in the Champion Bumper next week will be dominated by Irish horses. Britain, you don't seem to get as many sort of top level bumper horses. It's just the sort of format that British trainers seem to want to move away from as quickly as possible and get their horses hurdling. But Fergal has saddled 60% more bumper winners in Britain this season than any other trainer, which I thought was really interesting. And I went on to find some more about why, and he feels that they learn something in bumpers rather than going straight hurdling. A lot of them they buy from the point-to-point fields, and so they're running 3 miles, jumping 18 fences. So actually getting them back over 2 miles in a bumper, they can learn something there. It's actually beneficial to them without sort of maybe putting them under such extreme stress as a point-to-point would. And he also, that classic Fergal O'Brien bumper horse, they always get ridden out the back, don't they? So often they come through late and you get this really exciting finish. See that time and time again, and he actually made reference to that actually giving them patient rides early in their careers, it allows the horse to learn, but it allows the jockeys to know what they have underneath them.
Right. Yeah.
And so I thought that was really interesting. So
yeah,
Hidden Beauty in the Listed Mares Bumper at Sandown tomorrow. I think if she can come back to the form of her debut victory, and she's only run twice, something was clearly wrong last time, then I think she'll give Mullenbeg a
yes, I think you're absolutely right about ignoring that P by her name from Cheltenham, given the manner or how quickly she pulled up last time. So nice, lovely shout at a decent price.
Yeah, so we'll see. I'll be excited by that one. But as I say, I think Mullenbeg could quite easily win, but at the prices. And then the source of my weekend selection is the Paddy Power Novices Handicap Chase, which I've completely forgotten what time it is. And I'm just going to tap into the Racing Post here.
3:35.
Thank you very much, my old chum. And it is Danny Kerwin. And I'll tell you why. He ran well in the novices handicap chase at Kempton Park on Boxing Day when attempting to make all and actually doing a really good job of it before tiring a little after he jumped 3 out in the lead on what was probably softer ground than he'd like. I think it was good to soft that day, but given the way that race was won by a closing horse in Jacomar under Danny Mullins, who then did exactly the same thing on Tornado Flyer in the King George, I think the ground was hard work that day. And that is usually a strong race, the 2.5 mile novice handicap chase at Kempton on the King George card. The form hasn't worked out wonderfully in comparison to previous years, but still generally does produce good horses. Cheek Pieces sharpened up Danny Kerwin last time at Wincanton, and he won as he liked, making all and jumping really well. And he's a good jumper, and this is a sort of more general point as well. That seems to be seen to best effect on better ground. If you've got a horse where their jumping is a real asset, then putting them on really soft ground, they have to put in more effort to get out of that ground. And if they jump exuberantly, they can use up more energy on softer ground. So better ground tomorrow, it's good at Sandown. I think will definitely be in his favour. Indeed, on good ground at Cheltenham in October, he finished second to a nice horse that I know you've mentioned before, Bruno's Annual Invictus, with Torn and Frayed, Favouar, and Back on the Lash behind him. They've all been running very well since, including Torn and Frayed, who was a winner on Cheltenham Trials Day as a novice in open company. It'll be good ground, as I say, at Sandown on Saturday. And crucially, the final piece of the jigsaw is that Paul Nicholls is very much back in form. He's at 26% again in the last 2 weeks. So Danny Kerwin for me in the 3:35 handicap chase at Sandown on Saturday.
Very good.
So those are our weekend selections. And then just very quickly, and I'm going to ask you to do this in no more than 30 seconds, please, Bruno. Your Cheltenham nap. We can't do this pod and not have one selection.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've got two, and they're based on a process of elimination, and it delivers a nice double. And those two are Winged Leader in the Hunter Chase on Friday at 4:10, and also at 4:10 on Wednesday, it's the Old Boy Tiger Roll. And at the moment, that's looking like a 12-1 double. So those are my two.
Beautiful. That's a tasty double. Well, hopefully you'll still be here for the next episode if that double comes in.
And yourself?
Mine is, I'm going to go for, I'm really tempted to say Tiger too, but I will go with something different. Winter Fog for me. He competed in that Leopardstown qualifier, that Pertemps qualifier over Christmas that we've talked about in episode 1 or 2 of this pod. So go back and listen to that if you need to understand the rationale. We liked Dunboyne for the Pertemps final on the Thursday, who came from the same race, and we put him up in that anti-post angle. But Winter Fog very much fits the trends there too, and he has been put up by various shrewd judges throughout the preview sort of season the last couple of weeks. He's not the price that he was now. He's into sort of 6-1 favourite, but I think he's got an absolutely smashing chance. I think he's still very well handicapped, and I think he'll take a lot of beating. So Winter Fog in the Pertemps final on the Thursday.
Nice. And you'll be giving me a hell of a lot of shit for it when he comes in as well, given the chatter we've had the last couple of weeks.
Well, because you like Tully Begg, and I mean, that's why it's all good fun, isn't it? It's great fun.
Always.
You and I do a very good job, I think, considering how long we've known each other, of not just sort of nodding along to each other's thoughts. We often like to dig our heels in, and it makes for great viewing on race day. So I can't wait. Fantastic. So those are our weekend selections and our Cheltenham naps. That remains then only to tackle 3 out before we wrap up the final episode before Cheltenham Festival week. And we're going to start, as has become a bit of a trend for us now, with trainer tracking. Who's in form and who's struggling, which is obviously critical at this time of year. Now, Bruno, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I've decided this week to take a full season view of trainer form rather than the last 2 weeks, generally because the last 2 weeks can be a bit misleading. Things can be a bit skewed. So here are a list of, how many we've got here? 3, 6, 9 trainers who have a strike rate of more than 20% this season across Britain and Ireland. And they are Willie Mullins at the top, John McConnell, Nicky Henderson, Paul Nicholls, Anne Hamilton, the aforementioned, Gordon Elliott, H. Morrison. Not sure
Huey.
Huey is Huey.
Not so sleepy.
And of course, and Dr. Richard Newland. So some very, very familiar names in there from the biggest yards across both territories. But that's worth noting, and that's based on their yards having at least 100 runs in the season. So you can hang your hats on those guys delivering again next week. And I also picked out, there were a lot actually who were on a less than 10% strike rate in the full season, but I just picked out a few that might be around next week. And probably the one that would headline this little list is Gavin Cromwell, who has a fair few prominent runners, including Flooring Porter in the Stayers Hurdle. He's operating at just a 9% strike rate for the season, which is definitely below par. But as you mentioned last night on our call, he did have a treble last weekend, so perhaps that's a sign that he's just coming right at just the right time. Other names in there: Peter Fye, Ender Bolger, Jesse Harrington, who we mentioned before, and Stuart Crawford. So a few there that are struggling this season, just to have on your radar.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, as you say, that Gavin Cromwell treble was very timely for those of us that like Flooring Porter for the Stayers, for example.
Yeah.
So fantastic, good man. Thank you. Yeah, very interesting to see how this trainer form is changing around. As I've mentioned Paul Nicholls already, I'm very buoyed to see his return to form in the last 2 weeks. We'll have a load of runners at Cheltenham next week, but certainly I think that's good news for Brave Man's Game. And Nicky Henderson, I don't know if he's had a winner in the last 24 hours, but he's had no winners in the last 2 weeks. He tells you not to worry about that, and who would argue with that given his record at Cheltenham? But just adds an extra layer of as if it could be any more confusing trying to pick winners at Cheltenham. You can add that into the mix as well.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess I will take the next one then, and Bruins chip in if there's anything else you want to add. So if they win, then is a question that I asked myself the other day and said, if things happen early in the week, what does that mean for races later in the week? It's fun to look at developing form lines over the course of Cheltenham Festival week. I remember the novice handicap chase on Trials Day at Cheltenham in 2019 yielded Simply the Bets and Imperial Aura, who went on to win the novice handicap chase at the Cheltenham Festival and the plate on the Thursday, which was for the older horses. And that was when Imperial Aura won on the Tuesday. Simply the Bets got absolutely slammed and ended up going off 7-2 in a highly competitive 2.5 mile handicap chase. So I thought, well, might we see something similar this year? So I had a little look through, and I focused on the Tuesday mainly here because, obviously you've still got 3 days of racing to come after that. So a good opportunity for those form lines to develop. In the Supreme, John Bon winning or performing well would mean that Colonel Mustard has a chance, really good chance, in either the Coral Cup or on the Wednesday or the County Hurdle on the Friday. That would also mean good things for Mai Tai, who I know has been tipped up by people for the Martin Pipe in recent days, and Nappers Hill for the back in form Paul Nicholls. So Colonel Mustard, Mai Tai and Nappers Hill will be ones to look at if John Bon wins or runs well in what is a highly competitive race. If Sir Gerhard wins in either the Supreme or the Ballymore on the Wednesday, which he could still go for, then again that Colonel Mustard has been a really nice sort of yardstick this season, so that would frank Colonel Mustard's chances. It would also frank 3 Stripe Life charges. He's a fascinating horse. One that no one has talked about for this week. I can't even think where he's going, but and Highland Charge for Noel Mead. Again, I will leave you to go back in your own time and look back through the form, but those are names to bear in mind if Sir Gerhard wins. If Edwardstone wins, then Brave Shaska will win the Grand Annual. Well, that I thought was the case until Venetia decided to send Brave Shaska to the Arkle, in which he has no chance. Blue Lord, Riviere de Tel, or Saint Sam, basically the form of the Irish Arkle, would definitely frank Bustleton's chances for the Paddy Power Plate, so the same race that Simply the Bet's won, albeit we're looking at a different race that would frank that form. But if Blue Lord, Riviere de Tel, or Saint Sam win the Arkle, then or again run well, then Bustleton is only going to look to have a better chance on Thursday. If Honeysuckle wins, then Echoes in Rain could win the county, which would make you very happy, Bruno, I know.
Yeah.
If Run Wild Fred wins the National Hunt Chase, then Far Class would have an even better chance in the National, and Mr. Fog Patches would have an even better chance in the Kim Muir on Thursday. If Statler wins, then Ain't That a Shame's chances in the Kim Muir on the Thursday would look good. I like Ain't That a Shame, but I also have backed Run Wild Fred, so I kind of want that to not work out in true terms. And then Pat's Fancy is a huge talking horse in the over the previews. Friends of ours are on him at fancy prices. If he were to win the National Hunt Chase or go very close, then that would cast Brave Man's Game's chances in the Brown Advisory Novices Chase on the Wednesday. So 2 races later chronologically, in a really good light, and also Imperial Alcazar's chance in the plate on Thursday. So keep an eye out for, I think Bustleton and Imperial Alcazar are 2 horses for the plate that have monstrously good chances. And the last one in the same race, the National Hunt Chase on the Tuesday. So there's form lines developing all over the place here with that race. So definitely one to keep an eye on. If Brayside wins and Schoolboy Hours goes for the Kim Muir on the Thursday rather than running in the Ultima, which means he would already have run, in which case this could flip around and you might be looking at Brayside for this. If Brayside wins the National Hunt Chase, then Schoolboy Hours has got a great chance in the Kim Muir on the Thursday, particularly if Derek O'Connor chooses to ride him, which I believe is a decision that he's making as we speak. So there we go. Hopefully that gives you something to follow.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the whole form line thing. I think it's something I've looked at more and more this season. It just requires a bit more, not necessarily time, but efficiency in how you identify these things. And that is just fascinating, that stuff. 3 Stripe Life, by the way, I just checked his entries. He's still entered in both the Supreme and the Ballymore. Shorter for the Ballymore in terms of the pricing, but obviously not quite as competitive a race.
I suppose what we want is Sir Gerhard to go for that form line anyway, to go for the Supreme, win the Supreme, and then we all jump on 3 Stripe Life each way for the Ballymore.
Indeed, yeah.
Right, jargon busting. As we like to do each week, finish off 3 out with a quick jargon bust. At Cheltenham, there are 2 courses. The old course, on which the Thursday and Friday are run, and the new course, the old course on which the Tuesday and Wednesdays.
I'll do the explaining, mate. It's all right.
What is the difference between the old course and the new course? I'll leave it to the expert, Bruno. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I've only just become an expert this morning, but lots of talk about old course versus new course this week. And as the description suggests, the old course is the original course, and that's what's getting used on Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, these 2 courses represent 2 quite different challenges. Yes, we're just at Cheltenham next week, but actually 2 different challenges for 2 different types of horses. So the old course, a much tighter track, less demanding in terms of the undulations, and more suited to speed horses. So that's why, on Tuesday and Wednesday you have those shorter distances, kind of more concentrated in terms of the races that are scheduled. And then the new course comes into play on the Thursday and the Friday, much more suited to stamina horses. And the reason for that is, in particular anyway, the climb up the hill in the finish is much, much steeper. The whole track is a lot wider. It's what people within the game would call a galloping track, I suppose, in terms of its breadth. So those that will benefit from that are those that have real staying potential. So that's just one to note, and really is worth noting, because it does see horses that maybe you'd back otherwise not being quite suited to the task at hand.
You get a lot of talk on the hurdles course as well, on the new course, about the fact that there's only 2 hurdles in the last 7 furlongs.
Yeah.
So if you've got a horse that isn't the greatest jumper, but is has a lot of ability, then that course might suit a horse like that, which I think is one of the reasons why Good Risk at All, for example, in the Martin Pipe, has got people interested, because he is a seriously good horse with seriously strong form, not the best jumper. So at one stage it looked like he might go for the Coral Cup, which is on the old course. where there is more jumping, whereas the Martin Pipe might be more suited to him. So interesting one.
Indeed, and actually, just to add a bit of colour to where your horse should be positioned. Generally, there's not much change in the leadership of a race on the old course as you're turning in. So being prominent is the way generally to see success on the old course, whereas on the new course, it's a much more open contest coming down that home straight or up that home straight. So yes,
fantastic, good stuff. All right, thanks, champ. As always, another episode
pleasure
in the books. There are some exciting developments upcoming with the podcast, so do look out for updates on that through the Instagram page, and obviously we will be talking more about the future of Talking Horses podcast in subsequent episodes. But obviously, as we move away from the jump season after Cheltenham and into the flat season, the nature of our content will change, and we're going to be looking more towards the inner workings of the horses in the yard that we're involved with, and trying to give people a look behind the curtain of all of that kind of stuff. So watch this space, more to follow. It's going to be a really exciting few weeks and months ahead in terms of the content that we hope to be able to bring you. But for now, remember, you can access the pod through hopefully all your favourite podcast platforms. Please rate and review if you're so inclined. That's always hugely appreciated. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel for the video versions of the pod each week. Bruno, you are doing a fantastic job as head of creative, making those YouTube videos better and better each week. So do check them out. Also, make sure to follow, as I say, Talking Horses podcast, all one word, the Instagram page for news about the pod. Next week, we will be filling the Instagram with content from Cheltenham, from Jumps Racing HQ. So do follow us for all of that. And lastly, do leave your questions on any of those platforms if you have something you'd like us to tackle in future shows. Enjoy the racing this weekend and, of course, next week. Gamble responsibly, and we will see you all in a couple of weeks. There'll be no episode next week, so enjoy Cheltenham. Cheers for now.
Come on.